Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today on the C-51 project. I think that this is a project that many of you are familiar with. I think there have been a series of presentations over the years, and I think it's quite convenient that on the agenda this morning there's been such discussion about the need for water storage in the system. Whether we're looking at wet or dry extremes, water storage is something that I think we appreciate the value of regionally, nationwide. We're seeing an increased investment in these types of projects as we're dealing with more extreme conditions and needing to mitigate for those impacts, whether it's with regards to potable water supply, environmental concerns, agricultural production, etc. So what I hope to be able to do today, and jointly with Stephen, is to provide a review about all of the planning and organizational activity that has gone into trying to advance the C-51 project as a regional water resource development initiative with broad benefits as it relates to integrated water resources management, and let you know where we are today and hopefully really impart the extent to which there has been an incredible collective investment and coordination across the region in addressing many of the questions that have been raised with regards to this project over the years. And really it goes back a full decade today in 2016 that we've been working to advance this project, and I think we're very near to being able to get it off the ground. Many of you are probably familiar that the C-51 project was really derived from early investigations focused on environmental concerns specific to the Lake Worth Lagoon. And it was acknowledged as part of the restudy that there were excessive freshwater discharges in the restudy of the Central South Florida Flood Control System, excessive freshwater discharges that were being introduced to the Lake Worth Lagoon, that this is a very prized estuarine system, approximately 12 miles in length, freshwater discharges impacting water quality, seagrass, flora, fauna, system-wide, and that about 50% of the discharges were derived from the C-51 canal itself, and sediment loads being another issue associated with that, with those discharges. And so the restudy contemplated that much of the environmental challenges could be mitigated if those freshwater flows could be diverted from the C-51 canal itself. And the concept was that you would just have this other user that could take advantage of those flows, have them diverted, and utilized somewhere else in the system. But the user remained unnamed. And then in 2006, there was an increased focus among a number of stakeholders in the South Florida area about becoming that unnamed user. And this was born out of the fact that there were some very significant policy, environmental, and water supply conversations that were taking place in this time frame. We had the adoption of the Regional Water Availability Rule, which was going to restrict future withdrawals from the Biscayne Aquifer. We were seeing really accelerating water demands. I believe the deficit was on an order of 106 million gallons per day over the next 20-year time frame, so there was going to be a dramatic need to invest in alternative water supplies. And at the same time, we were just getting ready to enter into a very severe drought. And so in a couple-year time frame, there were a number of major drivers that really increased focus on this potential project, the construction of a large surface water storage reservoir to help mitigate for those flows, divert them to well fields that could provide an offset to future withdrawals, meet the obligations of the Regional Water Availability Rule, and creating additional long-term storage within the system. And it was estimated in these early evaluations that there was approximately 120 million gallons per day of fresh water that would be available for capture and redistribution. This initial planning effort was involving partners in both Broward and Palm Beach County, including the counties themselves and water utilities, and it was a multi-year planning effort. Resources were brought together. We contracted with Hazen and Sawyer, and what I want to share in this presentation is the amount of organizational leadership that has been shared among all of the partners. In this case, the city of Fort Lauderdale took the lead in contracting, but there was cost-share participation across all those parties. And we worked through some very elaborate technical analyses to really hone in on the water demands, water availability in the system, How might we move the water through the system? There were a couple of different options that were being explored with significant interest in routing the water through the secondary canal systems where we have, the infrastructure that's already in place. We were looking at the economics of the project relative to existing and other alternative sources of water, and really seeking to address those questions from basically a feasibility standpoint. The district was a strong partner in this effort. We had a facilitator that the district had provided in the early planning process, and there was a lot of, I think, technical support that was derived from that collaboration that was produced in a final report where we found that indeed there was sufficient water within the system in order to be able to meet these what were considered fairly significant water demands at the time that was being lost that could be beneficially reused. We looked at recharge rates for the well fields. Could we actually achieve the water supply benefit derived with the routing to these recharge areas? We explored a variety of regulatory considerations, including how water might be certified as being available ultimately. We looked at some of the water routing challenges as well, and I'll acknowledge that in the early planning process, there had also been the concept of routing water through the Loxahatchee Refuge through a kind of like a secondary canal that would be adjacent to the levee. That was not embraced by some of the critical stakeholders in the communities, and we actually worked very closely with Joan in the course of that dialogue and began to refocus our efforts on utilizing existing secondary canal systems as part of the Lake Worth Drainage District and the many drainage and water control districts in Broward County as a routing mechanism. There was also a need identified in this analysis to really give a full consideration to the costing of the project. We had preliminary cost figures. They were deemed well by all to be preliminary. So there was an acknowledgement that we needed to hone in more on that, as well as some of the governance questions. Concurrent with all of this activity, though, because of the magnitude of all of these other challenges that were taking place, it's interesting that in 2008, Broward County convened a water resources task force that was made up of elected leadership from across our community. Shortly after that, Palm Beach County launched a Palm Beach Water Resources Task Force, and we were jointly having conversations about the potential of C-51 helping to meet diverse environmental, flood control, and water supply needs. In the course of all this, with the production of the reports from Hazen and Sawyer, we brought that information back to the individual task forces, but also began to set the stage in the two task forces meeting jointly over the next several years in order to monitor the progress of the project and provide recommendations. One of the areas in which they did provide oversight was in advancing what we called a Phase 2A scope of work. This was designed to respond to many of the questions that were raised in the initial Hazen and Sawyer study. We worked very closely with the South Florida Management District on this scope of work as well. We actually had two scopes of work. It was kind of in addressing the two-way questions. This was going to be a go, no-go sort of scenario. If we could respond to these issues in two-way, then we would explore some of the more focused questions that were associated with a subsequent phase of work. Here, we revisited the water supply demands once again. We talked about the water certification process, that the project could potentially be advanced as a water supply or a water resource development project. At this point in time, we confirmed our disinterest in routing water through the Loxahatchee Refuge and that we had adequate capacity within the secondary canal systems to route the water as was proposed. There were also questions raised about the geology in the area of the proposed site of the C-51 adjacent to the L8 reservoir, and indeed was the geology there as tight as the L8? Would it function in that way? So we looked at the seepage rates in the L8, seepage rates for wells adjacent to the L8, and in fact determined that the seepage rates were either equivalent or better for the site that we were proposing. We also found that with regards to the cost effectiveness analysis as we looked at operations, that this was right in par with what was the operational cost for our existing facilities, and so that was beneficial. The next phase, though, of the analysis focused on really honing in on the water supply issues and water availability. And here I want to acknowledge that we transitioned once more. At this point in time, Lake Worth Drainage District took the lead in coordinating with all the partners and organizing the development of the Phase 2 work product. The South Florida Water Management District was a key partner, dedicated incredible technical resources to supporting the hydrologic modeling that was needed. Interestingly, through this analysis, we found that there was not just 120 million gallons per day of water that could be captured and stored, but indeed there was quite a bit more, and the figure was more like, I think it was 180, or maybe it was 160. But the additional modeling that took place was then focused on the demand projections, and could the reservoir, under varying climatologic conditions, actually have the water available for redistribution. So the graphic on the top is actually one that was provided by the district, showing that over a 41-year period of record, that there would only be 4 years in which the water delivery from the system would need to be over 85 million gallons per day, still well beyond within the capacity of the reservoir. And there was only 1 year in which we would probably look to almost draw the reservoir down. So indeed demonstrating once again that we probably don't need the water most of the time, but it is there for redistribution and providing that offset and delivery as was contemplated. We also looked at whether or not the reservoir would be drawn down for any excessive period of time, and found, again, that under the demand scenarios and in the preferred option that not in any one of those years would the reservoir go dry, but in looking at maybe expanding the scope of the reservoir to a larger area, you know, there would be the potential for excessive demand, so that would have to be something that would be, you know, managed in the sizing and management of the operations. But we really focused on the preferred scenario where the water's clearly available. Additionally, Palm Beach Aggregates funded a revised cost estimate that was more detailed than the preliminary cost estimates, and from that we received an updated report reflective of the contributions of many. We also, I should note, conducted additional water quality analyses in order to look at potential water quality impacts associated with the C-51 water and its redistribution through the secondary canal systems. We found that the water was pretty comparable with water quality within Broward County system. Lake Worth Drainage District undertook additional monitoring of their own system in order to answer some of those questions. And we recognize that while there might be some areas where water quality may not be as consistent, that through more consistent deliveries of fresh water, that we felt most of that could be, you know, mitigated, and felt like we had been able to address that question for ourselves. So the revised cost estimates that were provided on the project at this point in time, and I think it was 2012, were about $750 million for full construction of the project. But what happened here was that our demands had fallen off quite a bit in the ensuing years, you know, between 2006 and where we were with 2012. And the recognition was that, you know, we probably didn't need 150 million gallons per day in capacity for the next, 5 to 10 years, and that would be a real heavy figure to have to stomach short term, where we couldn't distribute or collect revenues on the water. So we began to talk now about phasing the project. Could we divide it up into pieces where we'd have a short-term investment and then reserve the larger scope of the project for future expansion? And I think the recognition was that we knew we would need the water. It's just a matter of timing, and we know that we need the storage, and as quickly as we can get that in place, you know, it's beneficial to move forward. And so, and there still remain questions of governance, which we tended to, I think, regularly punt because it was a difficult thing to, contemplate, since we don't really have too many examples of regional projects here in South Florida, but clearly we do in other parts of the state. So, having completed that body of work, we then had a joint action by both the Broward and Palm Beach Water Resource Task Forces to take up these two questions about phasing and governance. Resolutions were adopted by the municipalities, by the counties, by the League of Cities, endorsing the development of this governance finance work group in order to work through these next questions. You can see the representation provided there, where there's a slash between the two cities. It's the primary city and then an alternate. we had equal representation between the two counties. Both counties, both water resource task forces, we had drainage districts from each represented, equivalent cities, the South Florida Water Management District. While this was expected to be about a one-year initiative, we actually convened for a little over a year and a half. Cost share funding was provided once again by all the parties, and once again we had a transition in the organizational support. This time Palm Beach County took the lead in managing the contracting. So we had City of Fort Lauderdale, then the Lake Worth Drainage District, then Palm Beach County. In this instance, our agency was providing all the staffing for the governance and finance work group. We ended up negotiating a scope of work. The scope was awarded to MWH, and it did provide a very thorough evaluation of all of the cost considerations associated with this phased project. You can see how it was proposed to be developed with phase one at 35 million gallons per day, and the initial cost estimates for phase one at 158 million. And the phase two information is obviously on the slide. So we completed the final report that was endorsed jointly with unanimous support by the Joint Governance Finance Work Group. Moved back through our respective bodies. Many communities supported the findings and moving forward with the project based upon the evaluations that were provided. We also, in this exercise, agreed that as a matter of efficiencies, that the most logical approach would be to take advantage of the existing not-for-profit C-51 Reservoir, Inc. that could serve as the initial entity for organizing on the construction and permitting of the project, which is already underway, and that upon completion of the project, it would then be desirable to have the project then transfer to the local governments for management. But initially, we would take advantage of the not-for-profit that's already in place to help facilitate that. The exercise also resulted in, I think, fairly strong statements from the South Florida Water Management District that should the project move forward, they were interested in being the operational and maintenance entity. We've talked about what reimbursement for those services would look like. And I guess, so I've already talked about the unanimous support. I just want to acknowledge that one thing that I think is really important to say about this project is that, well, maybe two things. It's not the only alternative water supply project that's being entertained in the area. There's lots of other investments taking place with regards to reclaimed water and Floridan systems, but we know that diversity in our water resources is important, and the storage is critically important. And the longer that we take to move forward on a large project like this that cannot be funded by a single entity but requires collaborative cost-share support, some of the other partners will ultimately have to make other decisions as it relates to their alternative water supply investments, meaning that we either defer the project or lose the opportunity. And that's what we're really trying to hedge against today. Additionally, while there's only maybe a handful or more of entities that have stated strong interest in phase one of the project, it's not that there is disinterest in the project. It's just that they realize that they don't need phase one water potentially, but they're strongly vested in the storage and environmental benefits and additional water supply that would be derived with phase two, but you don't get to phase two until you advance phase one. So there is a short-term need in order to move forward with the project, respond to the opportunities that exist today, and set the stage for more significant investments that would and benefits that would come from the phase two project. The other thing that I want to share is that we've been able to explore some other beneficial aspects of the project, and one relates to not just future water supply planning, but it's the preservation of existing capacity, water supply capacity within our system. We have actively managed saltwater intrusion for decades, and it's not getting any better. Even under nominal rates of sea level rise, and we know that sea level rise is one of the primary factors that's influencing the migration of this front over the next several decades, even under nominal rates, we expect to lose significant coastal capacity of our well fields in Broward County. We're looking at over 50 years, about 35 million gallons per day. So we're going to have to start shifting those demands. We're also going to need to enhance recharge to the aquifer to help manage that front. But as we shift demands and mitigate, the recharge that is derived will help to push back the front while also potentially compensate for the concentration of demands that may need to be achieved in the more central portions of our county. We've also had the benefit of seeing, and it's not really a benefit, but we saw what the impacts of Tropical Storm Isaac in Palm Beach County, and with 2 weeks of, a neighborhood being flooded because there wasn't a place to put the water. And it really underscores the need for creating more storage within our systems today to mitigate for these types of circumstances. I also wanted to share the results of some additional modeling that we did in Broward County that shows the figure on the left, not the far left, the middle left, in the middle, I should say then. The figure in the middle shows where by the colored lines, where the saltwater front is expected to sit based upon existing pumping rates, and the black line is the current location of the saltwater front. So in 50 years, if we keep the pumping practices in place that we have today, we can see that most of our coastal well fields will be fully intercepted. This is North County, by the saltwater line. But we looked at what happens if we can maybe manage that front short term, but long term, if we shift those demands to regional well fields and look at utilizing C-51 to provide offsets for those concentrated demands, as well as provide recharge to compensate for future needs. If we were to concentrate demands in that way, would it draw the front inland? That's what we were questioning. And what we found is we can manage that approach with the figure on the right, and what happens is the saltwater front actually falls back to the current location of the saltwater line. So it really underscores for us the importance of looking at some redistributions and this additional recharge as a demonstrated viable strategy for meeting future water supply needs long term in our county, and I think we'll obviously find that this is fairly characteristic of what other communities can achieve as well. Finally, with my portion of the presentation, I just wanted to express again that this is really an incredible body of work that has been undertaken over a period of a decade now to try to move this project forward. We had the benefit of some relaxation and some of the challenges so that we could be more thoughtful and deliberative in responding to the many questions that were raised. But I think that we have done that, and we are very eager to move towards construction at this time. It's been very engaging of diverse stakeholders, and I think based upon the conversation today, we can all recognize that there's just a dramatic need for storage in the system, and this project has so many benefits associated with providing that storage relating to environmental, water supply, and drainage and flood control. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephen. Thank you.
Really just to wrap up from Jennifer from the district perspective and where things are with the project regulatory-wise. The ERP and consumptive use permits have both been issued by FDEP because of the district's involvement with the project. We didn't want to permit ourselves. And so DEP has been issuing the agency with that. Part of that is to note, as you can see with the figure there, the actual operations of the reservoir would be in conjunction with the existing LA FEB. There is no direct connection with C-51, with the canal, or L8 from the project. It kind of sits just to the west of the FEB, and so it would be a joint operation, which feeds into the district working on an O&M agreement, eventually taking over operation as the entity. The project also being considered by the Corps as part of the Loxahatchee River Watershed Restoration Project as a component. As has been noted, there's a lot of opportunities here, but timing-wise, not necessarily all of the project partners. So just to make note that public water supply is not the only potential use of this storage facility. Jennifer touched on the conveyance. Those agreements have already been put in place with Lake Worth Drainage District. They've been our partner as this entire decade. As far as the main artery of flow to get that water throughout Palm Beach County and all points south. They are looking, again, for those additional conveyance agreements as necessary, as well as the capacity allocation agreements with any of the future beneficiaries, who would then also have to come in, just, again, modify their existing consumptive use permits to account for that additional water. And potential, a lot of utilities have, because of the regional water availability rule, because of the threats of saltwater intrusion, looking for additional water supply, have come in previous years and looking at expansion of reclaimed water systems, the use of the Floridan. This has now come in later as an alternative so they can continue to use their existing infrastructure, their existing well fields, maintain their systems longer and potentially provide a cheaper alternative to public water supply. One thing I want to mention, it's not on the slide, but with the passage of the water bill, essentially water law as of July 1, because of the regional scope, regional nature of this project, the district will have an opportunity to name it as a pilot AWS project. That is a consideration in the bill this year. A little bit different that was put into law than what was previously proposed. It is an option, it is not a mandate from the state. That will take any questions.
All right, thank you. Do we have any comments or questions on this presentation? Josh first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jennifer, Steve, I just want to commend you guys on your efforts for this. I know it's been a long time coming. This is a great project, and I think it shows that the private sector, the public sector, utilities, Lake Worth Drainage District, all these different agencies, how they can kind of come together and work together. So I think that you guys have done a great job. I wish it could have been done quicker, but it is what it is. And I think that this is kind of a good model to show other projects that we can get out there. And it doesn't just have to be the government agencies doing it. It doesn't just have to be the private sector doing it. That it shows that we can work together, when we have a goal in mind. And if we can move some of the roadblocks out of the way, then that allows us to get something done and have good projects, like this project. So thank you guys for all your hard work and everybody else that's participated in this. This is great.
Thank you, Josh. Brian?
Yeah, I guess I'll take a compliment first before I make ask some criticism. But because having worked with a regional project, as Steve knows, it's a lot of effort goes into that to bring a lot of people together to come together. But I'd like some understanding of what the role of the district's going to be when it says O&M. Does this put the district in a role of actually being a water supplier or functioning in the water supply role? And when you talk about O&M of the project,
No, it's the actual physical operations, the calls, the decisions. Again, because of the conjunction and work with the LAFEV, there's really not a separate entity to manage that joint operation.
Okay. I've often understood the law provides for the district to be in the water supply business, but I've often been a critic of the role that I think if you start to tread over that line, you get into the issues of a conflict of interest. You're regulating water use and being a water provider at the same time, and that's, again, I just think it's a slippery slope to be careful of how you proceed down that path. The last thing was just as you said. With the passage of the law, don't forget the Cypress Lake project. It's also a project in the district that's permitted that also qualifies under the same funding initiative.
All right. Chad?
I just wanted to maybe see if you'd mind expanding a little bit on the consumptive use permit, because it's a little bit of a unique consumptive use permit. My understanding is that it's only when there's certain situation when there's water that's going to be flushed to tide is the only time that this facility is allowed to consume water. Is that accurate?
Correct. The conditions in the permit kind of go to the wet season available nature of the water. It's not something, a normal consumptive use permit, let's say, has a 1 in 10 level of certainty that essentially you're kind of guaranteeing that someone will be able to take water up to a certain drought condition. This being something that takes advantage of wet season water doesn't have that same level of certainty associated with it. But as Jennifer went through, the level of detail of the technical analysis, looking at the period of record of when water is available, how that water gets stored throughout the wet season, shows that the water is available and really wouldn't be in competition with any other user, let alone any SERP project or any other restoration strategies.
All right, thank you. Harry?
Yes, I'd like to state that the Lake Worth Drainage District is in full support of the C-51 Reservoir project. And as stated, we have entered into a conveyance agreement to route water through our system to the Hillsborough Canal. So we're completely on board.
All right, very well. Thank you. James?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. It seems like there's a lot of support for this project, and it's a big project with a lot of moving parts and a lot of governance in it. And perhaps that plays a role in the time lag that we're talking about here. But this project's been on the books for quite a while. We just had a presentation that cited back, refreshing our memory back over 10 years with some of the activities that have taken place with this. And I'd like to just cut to the chase on the Phase 2 modeling results with 75,000 acre-feet of storage that could work potentially in concert, and I invite the district to comment on that and how that storage would work in conjunction with the current L8 reservoir that's under construction. But if there's an opportunity to improve the functioning of the FEB in the L8 region, and there's an opportunity to add the 75,000 acre-feet of storage into the system, I have to ask why, and it's a proverbial question, why is it still on the books? Why is it not being constructed? I'm not sure. I can't understand what the holdup is. Is it the complicated governance on it? Because as we sit around the room and we hear from Tabitha and we hear from Beth Lewis and myself and other members of the RAC, storage is a primary component. For the last year, it's been a focus of every single RAC meeting that storage is needed north of the lake, storage is needed south of the lake. So I bring that question to the table. You know, why is it still on the books after 10 years? And I also want to bring to the table positive reinforcement to take the opportunity, if it's available, and start implementing the project so we can get to those Phase 2 storage components and get them online for a condition like we have right now. Thank you.
All right. Mike, did you have a comment on this?
Just sort of thinking about that 10 years, I've been a fan of this project for this whole 10 years. There were some very, very complicated issues involving conveyance, involving governance. I want to congratulate Jennifer and that whole group for getting at those problems. Those aren't, as you know, James, those aren't easy solutions. And when we capped the Biscayne Aquifer, there was an open recognition by water supply staff at this district and the governing board that regional storage facilities were probably going to become necessary at some point or another, and also that the land for those facilities was going to be hideously expensive. We did a lot of water supply planning that, as far as I'm concerned, is sort of marginally effective because we haven't really done enough deep water storage. This is one of the only options, and it solves a lot of problems. I mean, Jennifer, highlighted them. I think the issues that delayed it for 10 years, I think are pretty close to getting wrapped up, thanks to what you guys have done. I mean, there's always a question at the district about whether the district has a role. I just want to remind everybody the district's role is to protect the source, is to protect and develop the resource. And for me, deep water storage is a resource. It's that simple. You get to put water in there, that might go to tide when you don't want it going to tide, and it'll be available. The only water we're going to have in drought years is not going to be in these shallow wells. And there's also an issue, to go back to Albury's backyard, the L8 was supposed to supply water for the Loxahatchee. It got stolen, and it's in the flow equalization basin. And at some point, that's going to have to get replaced somewhere. And if you don't get it out of the C-51, I don't know where it comes from.
And actually, if you call the C-51 what it is an expansion of L8. I would love to get some of that water.
Exactly. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. I understand there's still a whole bunch of things that are going to happen by the people that are going to have to do all the hard work. But I think it's something that it's pretty easy for me to support, as I have for the last 10 years.
John, I'm sorry, you were next on the list. I missed you.
It's okay. I just wanted to compliment Jennifer and Stephen and all of the people that have been working on this. To echo Mike, there were a lot of issues when this process first started, a lot of issues. And that team has worked very hard to get through all of the issues and get to the point that they're at right now. So congratulations.
Thank you. Rob?
Thank you, Chairman. Palm Beach County and the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force have great anticipation of the benefits of this storage and the opportunity to take what is viewed as an adverse impact and turn it into beneficial use. That's a fantastic opportunity before us. And Mr. Chairman, if you let me go down just a little side road for just a moment, we've always known it's going to be quite a while before the C-51 flows to the estuary can be mitigated. And so a few years ago, Palm Beach County and the Water Management District, we jointly constructed a sediment management trap in that C-51 canal. It's working, it's helping. While we can't really ameliorate the flows right now, we can capture the sediment. So I will ask that the district look into the maintenance of that sediment trap. I know it's something that you have before you, but we think it is a big help, a good interim step, and we'll ask that you guys take a look at it and see if that sediment trap can be maintained so that it can continue to do its job. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you. Jill?
I'm just wondering if there's some kind of schedule as to what this does to the operation of the LA criteria?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Use the mic.
Yeah, could you use the mic? So I didn't hear the question, sorry.
Sorry, Jeff. Question, what does this operation do to the operating criteria for the LA?
Yeah, it doesn't change the criteria of operation for LA. LA is, part of the restoration strategies. We're in the final parts of construction. The pumps are being put in, and we'll start testing here the end of March, April. We'll actually be starting to pull water out of that as we go and put it into operation. What the C-51 would complement it would give us additional storage that could be utilized. Obviously, if it's for a water supply, the water gets stored first, and it's for recharge. The benefit we see is that if the water supply is not needed, it's a wet year, we have the extra water, then when we go in the dry season, there's environmental benefits that water can be used for. So it's kind of a two benefit type situation, and it just gives us more flexibility.
All right, we've got to move on. Aubrey, you'll be the last comment on this one.
Thank you. So just briefly, the L8 was originally designed to provide benefit to the Loxahatchee River to meet restoration flows. It is now, bless it, being used to help the Everglades, and we all love the Everglades. When that transition occurred, the district promised, at all levels of the district, promised that Mecca Reservoir would be constructed to benefit the Loxahatchee River. I believe Jeff and them are hard at work on that. Thank you very much. The Mecca Reservoir will not achieve restoration flows. It's abundantly clear that's a fact. The Mecca Reservoir plus a marginal amount of makeup water on a daily basis or even an interim basis coming from C-51 could get us all the way, and I promise you, the most cost-effective way to restoration flows to the river. I really implore the leadership of the district to contemplate looking at, if we construct Mecca, that is under design, that should be done ASAP. Once that's done, what is the marginal amount of water that needs to be made up to keep Mecca so that restoration flows can flow out of Mecca? I'm convinced C-51 is expanded L8. I beg you, on behalf of the Loxahatchee River, our only national wild and scenic river in this part of the state, to do that, let's grab some of the capacity out of C-51. It's a no-brainer alternative water supply. It provides on the backside flood control, which is a blessing to people who need it, and it provides restoration flows to our only national wild and scenic river. That is a win-win. The fact that you don't have to buy the whole reservoir to do that is a third win. So I don't see a downside to this project. I really genuinely implore the district to keep going with Mecca. Let's get that shallow water storage constructed, operational, and let's make up the needed additional water in Mecca coming from C-51. And I promise to be nice and leave everyone alone.
All right, we've got to move on agenda-wise. So I see we have at least one public comment on this agenda item. Martha?
Well, this is really, Martha Musgrove, Florida Wildlife Federation. This is really a remarkable achievement, and it has taken a good 10 years through 3 different governing boards and concerns at all points. We were very happy when the committee that was planning this project got the water, decided not to try to move the water through the Loxahatchee refuge canals. That was a really key point for us. But also the use of the L8 and the C-51 in regards to the restoration of the Loxahatchee River flows. The river itself is fine, but it just needs this little bit of fresh water, which we, the district governing board, has set a level 4. I echo Aubrey's comments, but I don't know that any people in this room recognize what an achievement it was in Broward County to bring all the municipalities on board. That was just utterly a miracle, and I congratulate Jennifer and all of the people that took a hand in it. The Lake Worth Drainage District in this county stepped up to it. I think you've got a winning idea here, and that it is completely inconsistent with the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which we don't talk about it a lot in the environmental community, but it also guaranteed a water supply for the urban area. This is the water supply for the urban area that helps to retard the salt intrusion that it results, which would result whether the sea rises or not. It's already there. It's already a factor. The more people we put on the coast and the more plugs we put in it, pumps for people, the more expensive drinking water becomes. And we might say industrial water. We'd like to see, of course, the conservation measures. And they are coming along for very other different reasons. But I think this is a very big step forward, and I don't want to underestimate the importance of it. There was a water war in Southwest Florida that took the legislature to resolve. Here you have an independent 501c3. I think everybody's happy with the governance system, and I think this is a very big step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Do we have any other public comment on this item? Okay. I want to thank Jennifer and Stephen for the presentation and move to our next agenda item. On Tuesday, we wrapped up the ongoing South Dade investigation. Walter Wilcox, our modeling section administrator, will provide the initial outcomes. Walter?
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here with you again today. At the status update in January, and I'm pleased to be able to share